The annual Global Health Initiative Gala was in full swing at the Plaza Hotel in New York City. Dr. Imani Carter stood near the refreshment table, sipping champagne and making small talk with fellow doctors. At 35, she had become one of the most respected neurologists on the East Coast. Her fitted emerald dress complemented her dark skin, and her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that framed her face perfectly. "Dr. Carter, there's someone who wants to meet you about potential funding for your clinic," her colleague whispered, touching her elbow lightly. Imani nodded and turned around, prepared to put on her professional smile, but the glass nearly slipped from her fingers when she saw who was approaching. Marcus Reed, after 8 long years. He looked different now, more polished in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. His shoulders seemed broader, his jawline sharper. Success had shaped him into an even more handsome man than the one she remembered. At 37, Marcus had transformed from a promising tech entrepreneur into a billionaire whose name regularly appeared on lists of the world's wealthiest people. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. "Imani," he said softly when he reached her. Not Dr. Carter. Just Imani, like he used to say it in college when they would stay up all night talking about their dreams. "Marcus," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the sudden pounding of her heart. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I recently joined the board," he explained, his eyes never leaving her face. "Your work with neural regeneration therapy caught my attention. I had no idea it was you until I saw your name on the program tonight." Imani doubted that. Marcus Reed had resources to know exactly who would be at this event. Nothing about him was ever accidental. 8 years is a long time, she said, placing her glass on a passing waiter's tray. She needed her hands free, needed to feel in control. "Too long," Marcus agreed. Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, perhaps? "You look amazing, Imani." "Thank you." She kept her response short, professional. The ballroom suddenly felt too warm, too crowded. People around them were beginning to notice, whispering behind their hands. It wasn't every day that one of the world's richest men focused so intently on someone. "Would you mind stepping outside for some air?" Marcus asked, gesturing toward the balcony. "Just for a few minutes. There's so much I'd like to." "I'm not sure that's a good idea," Imani cut in. 8 years ago, she had cried herself to sleep for months after he chose his career over their relationship. She had rebuilt her life piece by piece, without him. "Please," he said, the confidence in his voice faltering for the first time. 5 minutes. Something in his tone reminded her of the young man she once loved, before the billions, before the heartbreak. Imani hesitated, then nodded once. They stepped onto the balcony overlooking Central Park. The cool November air was a relief after the stuffy ballroom. "I thought about you," Marcus said, standing beside her at the railing. "More than you can imagine." Imani looked out at the city lights rather than at him. "You made your choice, Marcus. You chose your company over us. Over me." "I was young and stupid," he admitted. "I thought we could make it work somehow. By the time I realized what I'd lost, you had moved on." "What do you want now, Marcus?" Imani finally turned to face him. "Why are you really here?" Marcus took a deep breath. His eyes, so familiar yet so different, met hers with determination. "A second chance," he said simply. "I want to show you I'm not the same man who left. I have everything I thought I wanted back then, but none of it matters without you." Imani shook her head slightly, not in refusal but in disbelief. After all this time, after everything she'd done to forget him. "The gala is almost over," she said, glancing at her watch. "And I have patients early tomorrow." "Have dinner with me," Marcus said quickly, just once. "Let me explain." Around them, the sounds of New York City continued, oblivious to the moment unfolding between two people who once thought they'd spend forever together. 2 days after the gala, Imani sat in her office, staring at the business card Marcus had pressed into her hand before she left. His private number was written on the back in his familiar handwriting. She had already turned it over 100 times, remembering the past they shared. Stanford University, 2009. That was where it all began. Imani had been a scholarship student with big dreams of becoming a doctor. Her mother had worked 2 jobs to help support her education. Every penny mattered, every textbook was precious. She spent most nights in the library, determined to prove she belonged. Marcus was different. He came from a wealthy family in California, but didn't act like it. While other rich kids drove fancy cars, Marcus rode a beat-up bicycle around campus. He was already making waves with his tech ideas, staying up all night coding in the computer lab. They met when Imani fell asleep at her study table, and Marcus gently woke her with a cup of coffee at 3 a.m. "Looked like you needed this more than I did," he had said with a warm smile. For the next 3 years, they were inseparable. They studied together, dreamed together, and planned a future where her medical practice and his tech company would change the world. They were young and in love, believing nothing could come between them. Until something did. Imani's phone rang, pulling her back to the present. It was her head nurse. "Dr. Carter, your 2 o'clock is here, and there's a delivery for you at the front desk." Curious, Imani walked to the reception area of her clinic. There sat a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. No fancy gift wrap, no obvious signs of expensive taste, just her name written on top. Inside was an old, worn Stanford medical textbook, specifically the one she had mentioned wanting but couldn't afford during their second year together. A small note was tucked inside the cover. "I saw this in a used bookstore last year and bought it thinking of you. I've carried it in my travel bag ever since, hoping I'd see you again someday. Remember how we used to quiz each other with flashcards? M." Imani's chest tightened. She remembered exactly. In their last year together, Marcus had been offered funding for his startup in Singapore. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, but it meant leaving immediately for at least 2 years. Imani had just been accepted to medical school in Boston. "Come with me," he had begged. "We can make this work." "I can't just drop everything," she had argued. "My scholarship, my mother depending on me, my dream is here, Marcus." Their last night together was filled with tears and promises to stay connected. Weekly video calls turned to monthly updates, then occasional messages. The time difference and their busy lives created a gap that grew wider each day. 6 months later, she saw pictures of him at a tech conference with the daughter of a major investor on his arm. When she called to ask about it, his assistant said he was too busy to come to the phone. That was the last time she tried to reach him. Now, 8 years later, he was back, standing in front of her as one of the richest men in the world while she had built her life piece by piece without him. Imani placed the book on her desk and texted the number on the card. "I can meet Saturday, 7 p.m., but not somewhere fancy. The coffee shop on 9th Street. His reply came instantly. "I'll be there. Thank you, Imani." She put down her phone and turned to her patient files. Her fingers traced the edge of the textbook one more time before she pushed it aside. She had worked too hard to build her life and career to have it disrupted by old feelings. But still, her heart raced at the thought of Saturday evening and all the memories that might surface when they finally talked about what happened 8 years ago. The coffee shop on 9th Street was busy for a Saturday evening. Imani arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table in the corner. She wore simple jeans and a blue sweater, nothing fancy, nothing that suggested this was anything more than casual. She spotted Marcus the moment he walked in. Despite being worth billions, he arrived without security, dressed in a plain gray button-down shirt and dark jeans. A few people glanced his way, but in this neighborhood, no one seemed to care about celebrities. "You came," she said when he sat down across from her. "I would have crossed oceans for this chance," Marcus replied, his eyes taking in every detail of her face. "Thank you." They ordered plain black coffee for him, chai latte for her, just like in college. "So," Imani began, wrapping her hands around her warm mug. "You wanted to talk." Marcus nodded. "I owe you an explanation about what happened. When I left for Singapore, I really thought we could make it work long distance." "Until you didn't," Imani said flatly. "My investors controlled everything back then," he explained. "They pushed me to network, to be seen with their daughters and nieces at events. That photo you saw, she was an investor's daughter. My handler arranged it." "You couldn't pick up the phone and tell me that?" Marcus looked down. "I was drowning in the business, working 20 hours a day. When you called that time, I was in a meeting I couldn't leave. By the time I called back, you blocked my number." "You could have tried harder," Imani said, the old hurt in her voice. "You're right, I should have." He paused. "I thought about that mistake every day for 8 years. Their conversation was interrupted when the barista called Imani's name. Dr. Carter, your usual scone is ready. When Imani returned to the table, Marcus asked about her work. She told him about her clinic in the Bronx, where she treated patients regardless of their ability to pay. Her eyes lit up when she spoke about her research on neural regeneration. That's amazing work, he said. Your patients are lucky to have you. What about you? She asked. Is being a billionaire everything you dreamed of? Something flickered across his face. I have 3 homes I rarely visit and a company that runs without me. But I wake up alone every day. Imani didn't respond to that. Instead, she checked her watch. I should go. Early surgery tomorrow. Can I see you again? Marcus asked quickly. I don't think that's a good idea, Imani said, standing up. The next day, Imani arrived at her clinic to find a delivery of fresh coffee and breakfast for her entire staff. The note simply read, to support the important work you do, M. On Tuesday, a donation of new books appeared at the children's reading program she volunteered with on weekends. On Wednesday, her research assistant excitedly showed her an email. Someone had donated 5 new advanced microscopes to their lab. Did you see who it's from? The assistant asked. Raid Technologies, the Marcus Reed. Imani kept her face neutral. Interesting. That evening, her phone buzzed with a text. Not trying to buy your attention, just supporting causes you care about. Would still like to talk more when you're ready. For 2 more weeks, Marcus continued his subtle campaign. Never flowers or jewelry or anything personal. Instead, his gestures all supported the work and causes important to her. He volunteered at the weekend health clinic, showing up in regular clothes, taking instructions from the staff like anyone else. Dr. Wilson, Imani's colleague, cornered her in the break room. Do you know Marcus Reed is personally helping with our community screening program, and you're ignoring him? Are you crazy? It's complicated, Imani said. Well, uncomplicated. Dr. Wilson laughed. That man looks at you like you hung the moon. That night, Imani finally texted back. The park. Sunday at 10 a.m., we can walk and talk. His response was immediate. I'll be there. Thank you for giving me another chance. Imani put down her phone, unsure if she was making a huge mistake or finally facing what her heart had been trying to tell her for weeks. The autumn morning was crisp as Imani waited on a bench near the park entrance. She wore a light jacket and comfortable shoes, ready for their walk. When Marcus appeared, he was alone again, dressed in a simple sweater and jeans that made him look more like the college student she once knew than a powerful businessman. Thank you for meeting me, he said, his breath visible in the cool air. They began walking along the tree-lined path, fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet. For a few minutes, neither spoke, both unsure where to begin. Why now, Marcus? Imani finally asked. It's been 8 years. You could have reached out any time. Marcus slowed his pace. I tried twice before. 3 years after Singapore, I came to Boston looking for you. Your roommate said you'd moved to New York for your residency. 2 years ago, I sent a letter to your old address. I never got any letter, Imani said, surprised. I figured. He shoved his hands in his pockets. The truth is, I was afraid you'd reject me outright, and you would have had every right to. They stopped near a small pond where ducks swam lazily across the surface. You hurt me deeply, Imani said quietly. I had our whole future planned in my head. Then suddenly, you were gone, and it seemed like you forgot about me overnight. I never forgot you, Marcus insisted. Not for one day. You were always the standard I measured everyone against. Why do you think I'm still single? Imani raised an eyebrow. The tabloids suggest otherwise. The tabloids don't know anything real about my life. His voice carried a hint of frustration. They see me at events with women and assume we're dating. The truth is, I've had exactly 2 relationships since you. Both ended because they weren't you. A jogger passed them, and they started walking again. What about you? Marcus asked carefully. Is there someone special in your life? I was engaged once, Imani admitted. 2 years ago, Dr. James Mitchell. We worked together at the hospital. Marcus's face fell slightly. What happened? He wanted me to scale back my community work. Said I was stretching myself too thin between research and the free clinic. Imani shook her head. He didn't understand that helping people who can't afford care isn't just work for me. It's who I am. He was an idiot then, Marcus said firmly. Your passion for helping others is what made me fall in love with you in the first place. The word love hung in the air between them. Imani stopped walking. I need to be honest with you, Marcus. I'm not the same girl from Stanford. I built a life I'm proud of. I have boundaries now. I don't drop everything for anyone, no matter how special they once were to me. I wouldn't want you to, Marcus said earnestly. The woman you become is even more impressive than the girl I knew. I'm not asking you to change anything about your life. Then what are you asking for? Imani challenged. Marcus took a deep breath. A place in your life. Any place you're willing to give me. Friend, confidant, supporter of your work. I'm not presuming we'd pick up where we left off. Imani studied his face, looking for any sign of insincerity. And if friendship is all I can offer, then I'll be the best friend you've ever had, he said without hesitation. I'd rather have you in my life as a friend than not have you at all. For the first time that day, Imani smiled genuinely. You really have changed, haven't you? 8 years of regret will do that to a person, he replied. They continued walking, the conversation shifting to their current work. As Imani described her latest research project, Marcus listened intently, asking thoughtful questions. When they reached the park exit 2 hours later, Imani surprised herself by saying, My clinic is hosting a fundraiser next Saturday. Nothing fancy. Would you like to come? As a friend, she added quickly. The hopeful look on Marcus's face was worth the risk of letting him back into her life, even just a little. I'd be honored, he said. As your friend. The community clinic fundraiser was held in a local school gymnasium. Handmade signs and simple decorations hung from the walls. It was worlds away from the fancy galas Marcus usually attended, but his smile was genuine as he helped set up chairs. Mr. Reed, you really don't have to do this, said Nurse Lopez, watching in amazement as the billionaire arranged tables with the other volunteers. Please call me Marcus, he replied, rolling up his sleeves. And I want to help. From across the room, Imani watched him. There was no sign of the entitled businessman she had feared he'd become. Instead, he chatted easily with clinic staff and neighborhood residents, never mentioning his wealth or status. Later that evening, when the local band played, Marcus approached Imani. The clinic seems well loved by the community, he said, looking around at the diverse crowd of people dancing and laughing together. These are my people, Imani said proudly. We built something special here. I can see that. He paused. Listen, I heard your research team talking about funding problems. If you need. No, Imani cut him off firmly. I appreciate the thought, but I'm not looking for a rich savior, Marcus. Instead of being offended, he nodded thoughtfully. Fair enough, but if you change your mind, it wouldn't be charity. It would be an investment in important work. Over the next month, Marcus became a regular fixture in Imani's world. He joined the weekend reading program for neighborhood kids, showing up consistently even when Imani wasn't there. He learned the names of her staff and brought coffee for everyone on early mornings, never just for her. One Saturday, Imani arrived at the clinic to find Marcus sitting on the floor with 8-year-old Darius, one of her young patients recovering from a brain injury. See, the robot moves when you type in these commands, Marcus was explaining patiently, showing the boy a simple coding program on a tablet. That's so cool, Darius exclaimed. Can I make it dance? Absolutely. Let me show you how. Imani watched silently from the doorway, something warm spreading through her chest. Later, as they walked to get lunch, she asked, How did you know about Darius's interest in computers? His mom mentioned it last week. She's worried about him falling behind in school while recovering. I thought this might help keep his mind active. That was thoughtful of you, Imani said, surprised by his attention to such details. Over sandwiches at a small deli, Marcus told her about his latest project, a nonprofit teaching coding skills to underprivileged kids. I'd like your opinion on something, he said, pulling out his tablet. This is the curriculum we're developing. Since you work with children, I thought you might have insights. Imani was touched that he valued her opinion on something so important to him. As they discussed ideas, she realized how easy it was to talk to him again, like no time had passed. When her phone rang with a hospital emergency, Marcus quickly paid the bill and said, Go, do what you need to do. We can finish this another time. There was no guilt trip, no disappointed sigh, just understanding. 2 days later, flowers arrived at her apartment with a simple note. Heard about the successful emergency surgery. Your patients are lucky to have you. Dinner this weekend? As friends, of course. Imani smiled as she texted back, yes to dinner. But I'm choosing the place. That night, as she prepared for bed, Imani caught herself humming a happy tune. She stopped, suddenly aware of the dangerous territory she was entering. Marcus was becoming important to her again, and that scared her. But for the first time in years, the fear didn't make her want to run away. Instead, she found herself curious about what might happen next. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Imani was reviewing patient files when her research assistant burst into the office, face pale with shock. Dr. Carter, Westlake Foundation just pulled our funding, she said, her voice shaking. All of it. Effective immediately. Imani felt the room spin. Westlake provided 80% of the money for her neural regeneration study, work that was showing real promise for stroke patients. There must be some mistake, Imani said, reaching for her phone. But it wasn't a mistake. 3 hours and countless calls later, she learned the truth. Westlake had been acquired by a larger corporation with different priorities. All neurology grants were being redirected to more commercially viable research. 5 years of work, 12 patients currently in the study, all of it hanging by a thread. Imani was still at her desk at 9 p.m. when the office door opened and Marcus walked in, carrying 2 containers of food. Your staff said you haven't eaten all day, he said, placing the containers on her desk. What's happened? Imani explained the situation, her voice tight with controlled anger and worry. Marcus listened carefully, then said what she'd been dreading. Let me fund the research, Imani. I can transfer the money tomorrow. No. Her response was immediate and firm. Why not? Marcus asked, genuinely confused. You need the money. I have it. This research is important. Because I won't be indebted to you or any man, Imani said, standing up. I've worked too hard to build this on my own. This isn't about us, Marcus argued. This is about your patients, about the people who could benefit from your work. Don't you dare use my patients to manipulate me, Imani snapped. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You think your money can solve everything, that it gives you the right to step in and take control. That's not what I'm doing. Marcus's frustration was evident. I'm trying to help. I don't need your help. I'll find another way. Their argument was interrupted by Imani's phone. Her face changed as she listened to the caller. I'll be right there, she said, already grabbing her purse. Mom's in the emergency room, she told Marcus, her voice shaking for the first time that day. They think it might be a heart attack. Without hesitation, Marcus grabbed his keys. I'll drive you. At the hospital, Marcus stayed in the waiting room while Imani went in to see her mother. Hours passed. When Imani finally emerged, she looked exhausted. It wasn't a heart attack, she said, dropping into the chair beside him. Thank goodness. But she needs surgery to clear a blocked artery. They're keeping her overnight. What can I do? Marcus asked simply. For a moment, Imani's defenses crumbled. Just be here. And he was. For the next 3 days, Marcus brought food to the hospital, fielded calls from Imani's clinic, and sat quietly beside her during the long hours of waiting. He never mentioned money or the research project again. When Imani's mother was finally released, Marcus helped bring her home, carrying bags and making sure the apartment was comfortable. He seems like a good man, Mrs. Carter said when Marcus stepped out to take a call. Different from what I expected for a billionaire. He's trying to be, Imani admitted. Later that evening, as Marcus prepared to leave, Imani stopped him at the door. Thank you, she said. For everything this week, I couldn't have managed alone. You would have, he said with certainty. You're the strongest person I know, but you shouldn't have to do everything alone, Imani. Their eyes met, and something shifted between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. About the research funding, Imani began. We don't have to talk about that now, Marcus said gently. No, but we will, Imani replied. Soon. I have some ideas I want to discuss with you. 1 week after her mother returned home, Imani invited Marcus to her office. She had spent days thinking about the research funding and her feelings for the man who had re-entered her life so unexpectedly. I have a proposal, she said, spreading documents across her desk. a partnership model for the research center. Marcus leaned forward, curious. I'm listening. I won't accept charity, but I will accept a business partnership, Imani explained. Your company provides 50% of the funding as an investment. When the treatment goes to market, Raid Technologies gets a share of the profits, which go to your foundation for medical access in underserved communities. Marcus studied the papers, impressed. You've thought of everything. And, Imani continued, I maintain full control of the research direction and medical decisions. Your team handles the business side, patents, and distribution. Equal partners with separate areas of expertise. Marcus nodded. It's brilliant, Imani. Do we have a deal? She asked, extending her hand professionally. Marcus took her hand but didn't shake it immediately. Before I agree, I need to know something. Is this just about saving your research, or are you finally starting to trust me again? Imani withdrew her hand slowly. Maybe a little of both, she admitted. These past few months, seeing how you are now, it's made me think about us differently. The next day, they signed the partnership agreement. 2 weeks later, Imani's team was back at work, with new equipment and additional staff to expand the research. Working together showed them how well they still complemented each other. Where Imani was detailed and methodical, Marcus saw the big picture. When he became too focused on efficiency, she reminded him of the human lives their work would impact. In late November, Marcus received a prestigious innovation award for his educational technology program. Imani agreed to attend the ceremony with him, as friends and business partners, she specified. The ballroom was filled with tech industry elites and media. When Marcus took the stage to accept his award, he surprised everyone with this speech. This recognition means a great deal to me, he began, but I want to talk about something more important than innovation. I want to talk about growth. From her table, Imani watched curiously. 8 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life, Marcus continued. I chose ambition over love. I put success before the person who mattered most. In the process, I became wealthy but hollow. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Recently, life gave me a second chance to know an extraordinary woman, Dr. Imani Carter. He gestured toward her table. Working alongside her to develop treatments for neurological injuries has taught me what true success looks like. It's not about money or awards. It's about making a difference and becoming someone worthy of respect. After the ceremony, they walked together through a nearby park, the city lights twinkling around them. That was quite a speech, Imani said. The media will be talking about it for weeks. Let them, Marcus replied. I meant every word. They stopped at a small bridge overlooking a pond. The night was cold but clear. I'm at a crossroads, Marcus, Imani said suddenly. Part of me is still afraid to trust you completely, to believe this isn't temporary. What's the other part saying? He asked quietly. That life rarely gives second chances, she admitted. And that the man standing beside me now is someone I could love again, maybe even more deeply than before. Marcus turned to face her fully. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, Imani, but I can promise I'll never again put anything above what we could have together. I need time, Imani said, to be completely sure. Take all the time you need, Marcus replied. I'm not going anywhere this time. As they continued their walk, their hands brushed together briefly. Neither pulled away. 6 months after signing their partnership agreement, Imani stood nervously in front of the new Carter Reed Neurological Research Center. The modern glass building gleamed in the morning sunlight, representing everything she had worked for over the past decade. Ready? Marcus asked, standing beside her in a simple blue suit. No tie, no flashy watch, just the man she had grown to trust again. As ready as I'll ever be, Imani replied, smoothing down her white dress. Inside, staff and guests were gathering for the grand opening. Imani's mother sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Next to her were several patients from the initial study, including young Darius, who now walked with only a slight limp thanks to the new treatment protocol. As Imani prepared to address the crowd, she felt Marcus squeeze her hand gently. You got this, he whispered. The ceremony went perfectly. Imani spoke passionately about the center's mission to make neural regeneration therapy available to all patients, regardless of income. Marcus outlined their unique partnership model that balanced medical integrity with business sustainability. This center represents the best of both worlds, he told the audience. Dr. Carter's brilliant medical vision combined with accessible business practices. Afterward, as guests toured the facility, Imani slipped away to her new office for a moment of quiet. So much had changed in the past year. Her research was thriving. The center would help thousands of patients. And Marcus. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Marcus entered with 2 cups of coffee. Just like old times, he said, handing her a cup. Though I think we can afford better coffee now than we could in college. Imani laughed, remembering their late nights in the Stanford Library with terrible vending machine coffee. Thank you, she said, and they both knew she meant more than just the coffee. For what it's worth, Marcus said, sitting across from her, seeing you in your element today, leading this center, it's the most amazing thing I've ever witnessed. You get this, Imani. I just helped with the funding. We did this together, she corrected him. Equal partners, remember? Marcus nodded, a question in his eyes that he'd been patient enough not to ask directly. Imani took a deep breath. I've been thinking about us, she began, about what happens next. And, his voice was careful, controlled. I want to try again, she said simply, really try, not as college sweethearts or business partners, but as the people we are now. The smile that spread across Marcus's face was bright enough to light the entire building. There's one condition, Imani added seriously. Anything, Marcus replied without hesitation. We take it slow, build something solid. I need to know this is real, that when things get difficult, we face them together. Marcus moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Imani Carter, I have spent 8 years learning the hard way what matters in life. I am not the same impatient young man who let you go. This time, I'm here for all of it, the hard days, the good days, and everything in between. Imani touched his face gently. Then I think we might have a chance. Later that evening, they stood together on the rooftop garden of the center, watching the sunset over the city. Below them, patients were already receiving treatments that would change their lives forever. We did good, Imani said, leaning against Marcus's shoulder. We're just getting started, he replied, wrapping an arm around her. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Imani realized that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as its biggest challenges. The painful separation that had once broken her heart had ultimately led them both to become the people they needed to be, for themselves, for each other, and for the world they hoped to change together.